Now I would like to bring to the podium Jeff Pyatt to introduce our speaker for today.
Thanks, Kim. Last week I had new glasses on that I threw off at the beginning of my speech. Today I used a bigger font. Jason Wilson is our speaker today. Jason is a James Beard award-winning chef, a restaurateur, and an industry innovator. He's going to be speaking to us today on the importance of sustainability in the culinary world. Jason's current restaurants include Miller's Guild, Heirloom, The Lake House, and Civility and Unrest. He's a co-founder of Fire and Vine Hospitality, which they manage iconic restaurants and hotels in the Seattle area. You should look some of those up. An example of his innovative thinking, my favorite, is in the coffee industry, there's a waste product, and Jason helped the indigenous people in the coffee world monetize this, and we now know that as coffee flour. Most of all, Jason's a really good guy. Welcome, Jason Wilson.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the lovely welcoming and introduction, Jeff, and for lunch. Jeff's introduction basically ate up the entire presentation, so I'll give you a quick synopsis of myself real quick, but before that I want to invite you to kind of follow along here. So I'm going to be the annoying guy that just got back from a really great vacation and talk a lot about that throughout the day, a little bit throughout this presentation anyways. And what that amounts to is I was in, and I'm going to call this work, or maybe not work, but I'll call it a work vacation. So I get in my field, I meet a lot of really great people. I meet a lot of really great producers of our products, the ranchers that we deal with lamb, pork, and beef, literally the fishermen in Alaska and in Washington, and now in Mexico with prawns, and an olive oil producer I met this past year from Sardinia. So he said to me, hey, you should come and visit one day if you're in Europe. So I said yes. And so this summer, last week I should say, I was in Bordeaux with my friend Chris Upchurch, and he and I were shuttling 3 couples around to the Dream Bordeaux week vacation. And it was a donation for the Auction of Washington Wines, which benefited Children's Hospital. And I bring this up because I want you to think about the last time that you were in France or in Europe, the last time, maybe if you weren't in Europe, that you were at a farmer's market. And the process of this past 2 weeks for me was about realigning and reinvigorating and really kind of, as you put it, refilling my cup of what I got into this industry for and the passion that I had for it. So if your imagination brought you to somewhere in Europe, somewhere in the Caribbean, somewhere in Italy, and you said, that's the place I walked by and I saw the farmer's market, or if it just got you to Ballard, which probably takes as much time to get to either France or Ballard. But if it got you to that farmer's market, what you saw was these beautiful seasonal produce, this guy with the eggs. The guy I saw in France had cages of chickens right next to the eggs. You'll see that all of these wares are there and they're on sale. And it's cute, right? It's romantic. It's beautiful. And that kind of, I want you to see that. And as we delve in this a little bit more, I want you to reflect back on that. So I got in this industry, started cooking when I was 8. That's supposed to be a joke. But I've been doing it for 25 years professionally. And started out as a teenager, kind of saying to myself, do I want to go off and pursue college and business? Do I want to go off and pursue culinary arts? And I always had a hankering for it. Kind of figured it out when I dropped out of college after 2 years and said, I'm going to culinary school. And thank God it all worked out. So that was many years ago. My schooling in San Francisco laid a foundation, but there I worked for some really demanding chefs. And I always kind of sought that out, and that was the arduous process. Had the opportunity to follow a chef named Jeremiah Tower. Some of you in town may know it from Stars Restaurant here at Pacific Place. I came to open that Stars. I came there from Singapore where I was operating a Stars restaurant for Jeremiah there. So 4 years there. My field can take us to really cool places, and that definitely is one of them. Everyone here probably knows how love is, and so 2 years after opening Stars, I fell in love with this amazing woman that decided somehow that she would marry me a year later, and she promptly said, "You need to go out and work for yourself because you're very driven to do this." So I said, "Yeah, that's great." She found this amazing little house on Madison Street, and thus our first restaurant, Crush, came about. So if any of you have ever been there, that was the little house that could on Madison 23rd. Jeff brought up that, subsequently it was Miller's Guild at the Hotel Max, and now blossoming into the Lake House in Bellevue at the W Hotel, and most recently Heirloom. My work I've been really lucky, and in that sense, I mean, I don't discount that it comes with lots of hard work and really a passion that I can share with other people, but it's a little bit of luck too, that I get to run now today these restaurants and have the opportunities that I do. So my partner Chad McKay, you guys have all heard of El Gaucho and Aqua, right? So Chad and I have known each other for over 8 years, and we used to say, "Hey, let's do some work together." And just as I was opening Lake House, he said, "Now is our time." And so we brought our 2 groups of restaurants together to create Fire and Vine Hospitality. So my day-to-day is really working and mentoring the chefs in all of these restaurants in all these different locations. So I'll stay with the passion side of it. There's a big business side of it as well. In the restaurant part for me is part of what my passion really lies in, right? So I want to talk about sustainability. We all recycle, we all compost, or maybe some of us. After my trip back from France, now, any of you guys been to this farmer's market? We'll go back to that image real quick. You always see the guys selling baskets or little cool bags, right? Past 3 nights I've been going to PCC buying groceries for the house. And I get back and I'm like, "Honey, no one mentioned that I had these bags with me." And she's like, "They mention it when you don't have the bags. This is the new norm." I thought I was going to get an award or something like this because I brought my cute French bag with. And it's interesting to think about. So we do these things that we think are sustainable. And in our restaurants, we take this kind of other approach. We recycle, we use the water differently. We actually use cleaning supplies now in 3 of our restaurants that are all water-based. So having a smaller footprint as well as we can with these big restaurants is important to us. But if I can get you to think back to that image of your most recent trip to the market, what it really is how to balance the pinnacle ingredient, because we're after the very best. In every one of our restaurants, you're not going to go in and go, that peach was just kind of okay. It was brown, and I don't know, it probably could have done better. We're looking for the very best. And if it's the butter, if it's the salt, the olive oil, which we have huge commitments to, and all of the produce and products that we sell, how do we balance that? And so sometimes what we feel is it's rooted in a definition. And we define the pinnacle ingredient by where it's raised and what season it comes to us at, and that includes beef and fish. How it's reared, so is it organically raised produce? One of the hardest things, it's easy to do in your home. One of the hardest things to do in a restaurant is switch 10 restaurants moving next year to 12 into full organic produce, because we can't get this year in, year out. So now it's working with hot houses up into BC and people down into the Monterey Bay Area. But that's another piece of the sustainable piece that we're looking at. How can we serve our guests the very best? And then, so when it's reared, how it's actually coming to us, what season it's coming to. And then when it comes to proteins, we look at how they're culled, how they come to us. This is the first step for us in sustainability. We sustain these chains and these food chains or these supply chains by having great vendor relations, taking care of them, but also supplying them with the best information we can. But so I put on our little presentation here, functional food and a plan to prevent waste. That plan really is all about how we source, but it's also accepting things that may not be perfect. So go back to that pinnacle ingredient. You're walking this stalls in Pike Place Market, and you see cherries this time of year. I was actually eating some on the way over here today. And you think about strawberries. When was the last time you cut a strawberry in half and it was red all the way through? These 2 months it should be happening. But they're not always going to be perfect. And I think that's kind of the eye-opener for me was it's not going to look perfect. The cauliflower is not going to be this cellophane head all the time. When we get them from the farmer's market, they're going to have these little blemishes. We have 3 farmers right now that work with our group that literally grow. So we get together and talk seeds in January. By February, the seeds are in, and by March, they're starting to go in the ground. And so the conversation I've had with all 3 is, listen, our arugula, our romaine, and all of the things that are green should have holes in it. So you're saying yes. So I'm okay with this idea of the product being natural and being real and showing that it wasn't enclosed in this glass box to grow. And mentoring now 12 different executive chefs on how to change that viewpoint, that is the product that we consider arduous work nowadays. But ultimately, it comes back to the guest, and they say the story really is about the best product. The best product may be that there's a beetle living, in and around it, but this is how Mother Nature intended it. So we may look at this, and I'll mention it here in a second, we may look at this as actually sourcing the products that are going to be grown locally and organically first, and then seeing those things that we can't get locally via farmers or via small business men and women here in our area. So we really try to locate everything within our closest vicinity as far as sourcing goes. And then we also look to use things that are maybe imperfect. In the produce world, there's an acronym IDP, imperfect, delicious produce. So if you think about the amount of product that you consume in your house, let's just say in a week, imagine 30% of that was just thrown in the trash as soon as you got home. That's what the perfect produce that we get, that's what happens to it. Nationwide, we're losing this. And we're losing the battle because, in my personal opinion, because we have food shortages in our cities that are not only astronomical, but detrimental. So it's part of the work that we do to be able to support local farms and accept that imperfect produce, when at all possible, really goes to help not only the economies, but it goes back to help the local farmer and source the best product we can get. So supporting local produce and producer. Okay. Jeff mentioned coffee flour, and I think it's, we okay on time? Good. So I think it's important to bring this up. My first restaurant was a fine dining place, and my wife Nicole and I had owned it for 10 and a half years. In 2012, a guy I knew from Starbucks came in and said, hey, I've got this bag of brown powder, and it looked really illicit, and it's from Mexico, and I want you to try and make something with it. And my first reaction was laugh, like you just did. He told me what it was, and I was like, how did you get this? So I mentioned eating cherries, right? Because this time of year, we've all have coffee on our tables, right? This is essentially the juice. It's coffee beans that we know it are the pit of a cherry, the Arabica cherry, or Robusta, but it's a coffee cherry. So the fruit, so imagine eating those delicious Rainier and Bing cherries, and you spit the fruit out and just hold on to the pit. That's what happens with coffee production. So now elaborate that process a little bit more, and you think, well, boy, that's a heck of a lot of fruit to just get those pits. Where does this whole thing go? So for years now, over 200 years, the fruit was pushed into lakes, into rivers. It was buried. Huge bulldozers and backhoes will actually dig out and put it in. The fruit is very high in fiber, up to 56% fiber, half of which is soluble fiber, so it's easily digestible. High in antioxidants, but high in acids and in tannins, right? So there is a scant amount of caffeine in the fruit, which is the similar amount that you would have in dark chocolate. So all these things prevent livestock from eating it because they'll just get thinner, and they prevent composting because the worms can't get in there. So this package of brown powder was a couple of guys went down to Mexico, who were in the coffee business, and found a way to stop the fermentation process as they were harvesting the fruit and dry it naturally. And then they sent it out to a flour mill and brought it into this little powder. So for the next 3 to 4 years, I worked really, really closely with these guys developing food products. Cascara lattes, and you have heard this at Starbucks. This product is Cascara in Turkey. This is in Yemen, where it first started out. Cascara lattes, chocolates through Seattle Chocolate Company. There were crackers that we put up in Canada. We have pizza doughs and waffles and pancake mix in Japan. Anywhere that we could find coffee, and we would turn it then into coffee flour. So I mentioned Crush because this is the ultimate smart sourcing, but also sustainable process. I mentioned Crush because we were feeding the 1%. And in the Christmas of 2014, I got to go to Nicaragua and experience firsthand teaching the chefs in a group of cafes how to cook with this. So how to change their recipes, how to bring it. And this is an item that they grew literally 40, 50 miles just behind Managua in the city. So they started to grow there and all the way into the mountains. Nicaragua does amazing coffee. But then I got to see the other part of the business model, which was the farmers that were farming coffee cherries and harvesting them were getting paid for 70% of the weight. Where does the other 30% go? It's in the fruit. So they're only getting paid for the weight of the pits. Can you imagine working 8 hours a day and only getting paid for 30% of that? That would suck. So we went in and we paid them the 30% at the going wage. I got to watch as we were giving checks to these people that looked at us and said, that's 3 months of my year. And that started to make a difference. So we then started to look at this process, cleaning up the environment, reusing and having a healthy ingredient and putting it out there through this mechanism, through all sorts of food products, and said this is now becoming full circle. So I got back from the trip and promptly told the CEO of Coffee Flour, I'm like, I'm done doing fine dining. I need to do this. So the restaurant now is the R&D lab for Coffee Flour. I know, leap of faith, right? Think about food and ultimately think about it as medicine. And I'm sure I'm not preaching to the choir here, but I love to do this, and I love to have you continue to go back to that trip down Pike Place Market, or like I said, in France somewhere. They're out there. Those fruits and vegetables are out there for a reason when they're out there. And the same is true in winter. Those things that are happening in Mother Nature, those are good for you. This is breakfast shot from the lake house. Every day we juice beets and ginger and apples, peppers and pineapple, and then a bunch of kale and spinach for different juices. It's a great way to start the morning off, but it's a great way to keep your body functioning and healthy. And when you commit to having that, to sourcing that best foods, your body feels it, your mind feels it, and the people around you are affected by it. I tend to look at the food that I do as maybe being produce driven. And I know we have 5 working on 6 steakhouses, right? So, but that produce driven, if you think about it, the peppercorns, all of the spices, all the seasonings, these are all plants, seeds, barks, and so forth. So it's a great way for me to look at it like that's where your flavor is going to come from. Makes sense? I think in closing, I want to be able to say thanks, obviously, for having me out here. If we look at food as part of this journey and as part of where I continue to go, really it's about how do we find that best ingredient, how do we bring it forward, serve it and highlight it in its very best way, and then how to just spread that gospel. I could sit up here and tell you all day, praise cheeses, but it's really about how do you find that best thing and then bring it forward to everybody else in the simplest of ways. So thank you very much. If anybody has some questions, I'm obviously here to answer. There is no barrier on what you can ask, so please have at it.
Thank you for being here. And just a quick question on the IDP. As a restaurateur, why does it matter what it looks like? As a consumer, we buy with our eyes. And what we buy when we go to your restaurant first is going to be visual or maybe through our nose. But as a restaurateur, why wouldn't you buy the best regardless of what it looks like?
I always have convoluted answers, so I'll apologize in advance. I was talking with an artist recently, and she said to me that what we do is really fascinating to her. And I said, no, what we do is pretty horrific. If you think about it, we take living, beautiful things, and we tear them apart, rip them up, and so forth. And then we try to bring them back together on this plate in a way that allows our guests to eat with their eyes. So if I look at the IDP program, what I'm doing is taking the imperfect cauliflower head, the carrot that has its legs twisted around itself, and all of these things, I'm taking them, and I'm going to, as a culinarian, as a chef, I'm going to slightly transform or augment that appearance so that the guests can now, that looks good, but eat with their mouth and really enjoy that. But we're also doing is taking that out of the waste system too. Yeah.
Question from Kevin Crane.
Thank you for being here, Chef. My question is, how are you using this flour? Are you using it like a roux in sauces? Are you baking with it? Is it part of your cocktail program?
That's a great question, and I can say yes, yes, yes. Anyone remember the old commercial for Tootsie Rolls where they're walking around and saying, everything I think I see is a Tootsie Pop to me? We played that game for 2 years straight with coffee flour. It was, there's salad dressing. It was caprese salad. We put olive oil and balsamic on it, and we figured out how to take the fiber in the coffee flour and emulsify it with balsamic to make basically a mayonnaise. Drinks, so we have really dynamic bar programs. We use coffee flour, which has a spicy, aromatic, slightly smoky, and toasted oat kind of flavor to it. Add that into gin and takes cheap tequila and makes it delicious. Really interesting ways. We've done iced tea. I didn't mention this in my intro, but I also done a 14-month contract at Google in Kirkland running the food program there. Really fun time, but we did iced teas there with coffee flour that were just phenomenal. So we had the ability to take it and say it applies into a drink, it applies into chocolate, it adds structure to gluten-free baking and pasta. You actually can bake and do pasta with it, so another area there. And then we have a sauce area. So all those areas is where we kind of define where we can place coffee flour. So it's really up to the end product and to the client, how they want to use it.
We have a question from David Woodward.
Thanks very much. This interests me a lot because a lot of us are, very trying to be conscientious. We want to, lower our carbon footprint. We're worried about climate change and all that. And then as soon as you try something like eating more vegetables or eating vegetarian or something, then you see the article that says, by the way, this is worse for the environment. Everything you do, you find there's a counter to it. You've got a lot of knowledge and insight. What about the crossover to carbon footprint and, lowering that, and where is there greater efficiencies in all that you're doing?
We tend to look at it as location, so it's all in locale. 6 steakhouses right now. I gotta say, I hope the great steak god doesn't hear me, but that's the steak, beef in general and livestock is going to be the most impactful. So we try to augment that by really digging in hard and supporting local produce because that can somehow offset that. We look at what eating vegetables, and I like to think about it like meat is a treat, and maybe it's my age now. But I also think from a chef's point of view, I get way more flavor coming out of my vegetables. I had steak dinner last night. We had 7 different vegetable dishes, 3 which my son made, which were delicious, and then 2 steaks. And that was kind of meat as the treat. We'll have all of these things. And that's the approach that we take with Lake House and Heirloom. Clearly with the steakhouses, it's the other turn. But I think that also helps with that carbon footprint, because you don't need to bring things in that, in our area that aren't growing here. Now, does that mean no lemons with a martini? No, we can't do that. But it may mean that that's where you limit your lemon use, and you move on to other things. And I'll be quick with it. Verjus, which is a green grape juice essentially. It's a very bitter but not as acidic as vinegar. There's 3 different purveyors of Verjus, and you can get them in wine shops and specialty stores, and that's something that's grown regionally here in the Northwest. So we took out lemons and limes in 2 of the restaurants as a result of using Verjus instead. So you can dig around.
A question from President Kim.
Jason, thank you so much. The question is, going back to the beginning of your presentation, what are the synergies that prompted you to do the partnership and create Fire and Vine?
Thanks for asking. I shared with you my passion for food. I mean, if it wasn't clear, I just said it again. At a very young age, I fell in love with not only the action in the kitchen, but everything that happened around that. I didn't have a passion for human resources, accounting, all the other stuff that goes around that, right? My partner Chad that's his gig, right? And I'll be honest with you, I've cooked with Chad a lot. He's a damn good cook too. But this is where I was able to step aside for a moment and say, okay, I'm going to take on this big project in Bellevue with 2 locations there. Miller's Guild. At that time, I had Crush operating as well. And I just said, gosh, this is more than I should be handling. Chad was in this area of his company's growth where he really wanted to take on and grow his business bigger. So we basically had a coffee at Starbucks on Queen Anne and said, hey, how about if you play this position and I'll play this one, and we don't ever have to try and get in each other's, and cross-reference, but we can yin and yang. And that for me was the biggest blessing ever, because now I work with chefs and mentor chefs and bring them up and challenge them, and I don't worry about the stuff that I kind of didn't do well.
We have a question from Skip Roland.
Well, thank you. Yes, I have a mundane question, and my question is about price. Is your average ticket more like the Rainier Club, or is it closer to Skipper's Fish and Chips? Because I'd like to check you out.
Great question. I think that, this does, my speech made seem like we're going to come across like everything is Rainier Club, or even beyond that. But I think what I want to share is that we do have at every range. Miller's Guild's a steakhouse environment that's kind of street food as well. Everything there is going from the low end $12 up to the top end of $120 for a steak for 2, with all the accoutrements and all this. But really, that concept stays in that price point. Heirloom and Lake House are kind of that middle of road price point. Again, they do a steak for 2, but pretty much there it's 14 to 18 for apps, that kind of deal. We want to be able to offer within our group the highest level of quality, balanced with a value. But I was told recently that when you say "but," everything you just said doesn't matter. So, however, the recent stories in the paper about RUI's troubles, if anyone's heard of this, they were talking about the problems with the recent wage increases up to 60% from just 7 years ago, and that's absolutely real. It's very difficult for us as chefs and as business people to be able to balance our menu pricing with, staying afloat, with making a go of it. We've been very smart about things. We've done things on multiple facets so we can stay committed to the highest quality steak programs, fish programs, and produce. But we charge what we charge because we need to stay in business, ultimately. Thank you very much.